Will the US achieve regime change in Iran? I suppose that's what the Americans used to call the $64,000 question. Let's actually ask a real expert what he thinks. Glenn Diesen from the University of Southeastern Norway, nowadays a world-renowned commentator and analyst. Professor, thanks for joining us again. It's been some time. I think we last were together in Minsk. It's a different world now than it was in Minsk. And that was a security conference. Ain't much security in the world right now, is there?
No, it's falling apart very quickly. Again, I think most of it would have the same source. That is, the world is transitioning away from unipolarity towards multipolarity. I would say multipolarity is already here in terms of distribution of power, but I think the world is being pulled in both directions at the moment. That is the US trying to restore its hegemony. Europe's trying to find its place in this hegemon, under this hegemon, and the rest of the world appears to be pushing back.
Well, let's deal with those 3 points, seriatim, if you don't mind. The Americans are trying to reassert their hegemony. Well, it worked for them in Venezuela. Is it going to work for them in Iran? And if not, why not?
Well, this is a strange thing because you heard so much of the rhetoric coming out of Washington that now they saw what happened to Maduro. I'm sure the Ayatollahs are watching and they should take be fearful if they don't fall in line. But it's a very strange comparison to make because the U.S. didn't really use that much military force going into Venezuela. They didn't go in and try to defeat it militarily. They went in and kidnapped the president and his wife and, patted himself on the shoulder and declared a great success. Iran is very different. So this idea that, of course, they could never fly in and kidnap him, but what they're going for in Iran is very different. It's a huge country. It's been preparing itself for an attack for decades, and indeed, it can't really be subordinated either. And so I just don't see why they would make this comparison at all, because I think they began to delude themselves. And but it all goes to a common theme, though, this idea that the reason why we have conflicts around the world is because there's some bad men out there, and if we just knock out those bad guys, then it all will fall apart. So they kidnapped Maduro, but they're not in control of Venezuela, and the idea is let's kill their religious leader in Iran, Khamenei, and then suddenly the whole country would just fall apart. I don't know where they get these ideas from, but it's always the same idea. And sometimes they're able to unleash chaos. I see no pathway towards a stable regime change. I don't see a replacement government that can take over. I think any regime change in Iran, not likely, but everything is possible, would then result in some disintegration, civil war. Otherwise, they would need to put in some puppet who would have to rule as a dictatorship.
Well, they want that, don't they? They want to balkanize Iran, as they have successfully balkanized so many places. They would like to sectarianize, and indeed, someone in Israel in a big publication just this evening has said that the whole of Sykes-Picot, the current divisions, if you like, in the Arab and wider world, have to be redrawn. And guess what? Their plan to redraw it is to have not 27 Arab countries, but to have, 127 Arab countries, all based on ethnicity, all based on sect, all based on religion, all based on the smallest unit that the West can continue to exploit. And they clearly have that in mind in Iran. The question is, are they going to succeed? Now, looking at the war so far, and I admit that not everyone can see this because not everyone has access to the facts. They don't know how many Americans have been killed. They don't know the hell of a pounding that Tel Aviv and other Israeli cities are taking. They only see the death toll in Iran, and people think it's so frighteningly horrific that this war can only end one way, but that's not really true, is it?
No, I think if anything, it's more likely, as time passes on, it will go in Iran's favor. The United States, it has some problems with its munitions. It can't stay in this war forever. Indeed, they're already starting to pull in some air defenses from, that is discussing pulling in from South Korea, and there's less to go to Ukraine and their other wars. So overall, there's a huge problem with the weaponry, and overall, I think the United States didn't plan for a long war either. They planned for a short Maduro-style regime change operation, and when it didn't work, they assumed that they would be able to perhaps then put a quick end to it. But the Iranians are in a bit of a difficult spot because they can't let this be a short war either for the Americans, because then they'll just be back again in 6 months. So it is important that that Iran restores the deterrent. But of course, that means a lot of death and destruction. But you are very right. I think people are very much deluded by how they by not having access to the information about what Iran is actually doing, because as American air defenses, radars are all exhausted, the Iranians are now bringing out more and more advanced drones and missiles. So they're preparing, and they have prepared for a long time, for a very long fight. And I think the United States, it was taken by surprise. I don't think they should have, because the Iranians made it very clear. If we're attacked, we consider it an existential threat. You can call it a regime change, but that essentially means the balkanization. And if you strike, we will act accordingly, which means we will strike all American bases in the regions. We might shut down the Strait of Hormuz, and we will make sure that we bring the pain to you. And that's the only way to restore a deterrent. That's exactly what they did. And so I don't understand the narratives we have in the media here that, we just killed their leader and now somehow they will welcome us as liberators. It's very strange.
Well, it's a zero-sum game. You're right, I think, on that. I mean, there's no compromise possible on this, at least not on the Iranian side. It would mean the end of their nearly 50-year Islamic revolution. It would be the end of Iran as a single country. Would mean an Iran that became, a jigsaw puzzle of ethnic and sectarian basis. So it's a zero-sum game. Either the Iranians win or the Americans win. It's not like Venezuela, where, if I was being unkind, I'd say that a fifth column was suborned and compromised, and the United States can now live with the regime in Venezuela. But they can't live with the Ayatollah's son as the supreme leader, pledging revenge for both his father, his mother, his wife, and his grandchildren, his nephews. He can't, I mean, that's the worst pick possible for anyone who thinks that this can end with a Delcy Rodriguez.
No, but this is the very strange thing. Because, well, if you want to draw comparisons, again, between Venezuela and Iran, it's, in Venezuela, you have people like Machado who comes out there, they're quislings essentially offering to, if you just topple our government and bomb it properly, then I can fill the vacuum. Almost word by word comes Reza Pahlavi, who then more or less make the same speech. Just, destroy Iran, bomb it, and then we will fill the vacuum. There's no political support. None of this makes any sense. I did want to address something you said before, though. Why they want to not just break up Iran, but one confusing part for me is why all the Arab states are just sitting idly by, because as you said, Israel would like to weaken them as well, divide them as well. This is not very unique. This is, divide and rule. This is what you want to do if you want to dominate. And Israel wants regional dominance. The US wants global primacy, which means both of them have a reason to knock out Iran as a center of power. And this is the path you take. You sow divisions and you break it up, and you establish yourself as an empire of chaos. By as long as they're divided, then you will rule. This has similarities to what they want to do with the Russians, by the way. If you paid attention to this peace summit they had in Switzerland, they didn't invite Russia, but then they talked about Russia being a home of captive nations. We have to liberate them. There's 200 nations there. We should free them all. And then, of course, the EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas jump along, and well, the world would be more peaceful if Russia would be in many, many smaller states, because then, well, they would be easier to control. And I think that's what they're looking for in the Middle East as well. So they're willing to burn down the region, essentially to rule over the ashes. And I think it's going to be horrible for everyone involved.
Well, I've just been in Russia, so I can tell them they've got absolutely less than zero chance of achieving that in Russia. But the Iranian situation is rather more worrying, except this anticipated uprising by liberal, pro-American elites is now seen to have been completely bogus. They always hopelessly overstated the number of liberal, pro-Western people there were in Iran. They basically only formed that view on the testimony of the people they met in the lobby of the Intercontinental Hotel. But you and I both know Iran's a lot bigger than that. So they're turning to their old friends, the Kurds. Now, the Kurds have been taken off the shelf no less than 8 times by the United States and betrayed every single time, including just a few weeks ago when the SDF were betrayed to Jolani and the Al-Qaeda extremists in Syria. Are the Kurds going to fall for it one more time?
They could, like you said, if it's worked this many times, it could again. But no, this is another way of divide and conquer. That is the discussion now about arming Kurdish groups. Not sure if they're 10% of the country, but it's not as if 10% is going to go along with this. But it is possible. You would probably know better than me, but it shows the strategy here, though, which is which is not some peaceful regime change. It is to destroy Iran, because arming the Kurdish groups, that's something that could trigger a civil war. That's essentially the Syrian solution for Iran. And look at Syria today. They're supposed to be about democracy and freedom and human rights. Now they have an ISIS leader ruling it, massacring, killing all the ethnic minorities. So it's quite gruesome, and I think that could be seen as a good solution, essentially, for Iran, if you want to weaken this important center of power, which, unlike the Gulf states, refuse to submit themselves to the rule of the United States. But it's also fascinating to see how this the narrative has shifted, because the whole thing began with the United States and its allies shedding crocodile tears over protesters in Iran, and then they talked about having a more democratic government, or the brutal rule of the Iranian government or regime, as they say, and now we're essentially seeing bombing of schools, hospitals, the airport, civilian residents. And now we're talking about essentially trying to trigger a civil war, which could kill hundreds of thousands. So the whole, the whole narrative stands on shaky grounds. But this is essentially what we saw in the unipolar moment since the 1990s. That is, you had this unholy marriage of liberals on one side who argue that wars are okay for humanitarian interventions, and on the other side you have the neocons who wants global primacy through military force, and they kind of joined hands and said, well, let's dominate the world together and this will be good for human rights. This is becoming a less and less convincing story by every war we go through. But now in Iran, it's just, I think that story is already dead, that somehow this war is about helping anyone.
Now, the Turks, of course, would need to enter the chat at this point. Turkey knows that Israel has ambitions to cut them down to size. You could make exactly the same arguments about Turkey as you could about Russia, as you could about Iran, captive nations, peoples, and so on. But also, if you promise the Kurds a country of their own, as Donald Trump literally did, the territory of that country of their own will in large part be from Turkey. So it literally means the dismemberment of Turkey. they're hardly likely to go along with that, but they might even historically join with the Iranians and join the war, don't you think?
Well, it's not inconceivable. I mean, there's a lot of things that have surprised us a lot, and they keep happening. But you have a large. Well, the Kurds tend to live in the regions in there in Iraq, Syria, Iran, and Turkey. And so far, the Americans have used the Kurds to undermine the unity of Iraq. They used it also. They used also the Kurds in Syria, and as you correctly pointed out, betraying them both the times. And now they're going to be used in Iran. And if they're going to have their own homeland where you rip up these states, it's very hard to see just ripping up Iraq, Syria, and Iran. That will put a lot of pressure on Turkey. So no, I think the Turkey is watching this with great concern. And it's not as if the intentions aren't being stated clearly as well. I think we all listened to this interview by Tucker Carlson, where he interviewed the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Huckabee, and he explains, well, God promised them the land, not just Greater Israel, but essentially half the Middle East. If they wanted it, it's theirs. God wants it. I mean, this is where we are now. So I know it's just link it to the Turkish issue. And, they will. I was just going to say, Turkey is listening to this because they will take a chunk from them as well. If it's not the Israelis, it will be severing the Kurdish regions from Turkey. And if you listen to some Israeli media as well, they're now describing Turkey as probably being as dangerous as Iran. So if Iran is knocked off the table, this is not great for Turkey. Then they might stand as the next one. So it's better to have an Iranian boogeyman and take the pressure of you.
Now, talk us through the European situation, Professor. The British are half in, half out. The French are half in, half out. The Germans are all in. I warned them in Parliament repeatedly. I warned them that the reunification of Germany would lead to this. Germany is dedicated to having the largest land army in Europe. It has effectively abandoned its post-war peace posture. Under Merz, it is raring to go for war. And when Merz was pranked by those two wonderful Russian pranksters who seemed to find it very easy to fool powerful people about whom they're speaking, the Germans are, as I say, all in. And yet the same Europeans are now saying, according to the Financial Times, that they have to start talking with Russia to solve the now yawning chasm of natural gas supplies. Summarize the European scene for us, if you will.
Oh, I think you summarized it well. The British and French, obviously, they said that they want to protect their allies and assets in the region. But they, as you said, half in, half out. I think this is because they say they want to only shoot down Iranian drones coming in, and somehow then it's okay. But then you're also a participant. It's a bit like being, almost pregnant or halfway pregnant. You can only, if you do this, then you give the U.S. an ability to strike with greater immunity. So they would easily become targets then as well. But the Germans is an interesting one because this was kind of the German story after World War II. Sorry, it was almost a story about the hope of humanity, that how they could transform to benign power. But you're very right. After the Cold War, after the unification, there was a lot of skepticism both in France and UK at that time. That what would the more powerful Germany look like? Would it simply be all nice? And I remember I was in the army in '99 when. Exactly 10 years after the reunification of Germany, and German planes again took to the sky to bomb another European capital in an illegal war of aggression against Yugoslavia. And since then, of course, we've seen Germany also full-heartedly support the genocide in Gaza. They've also taken a very leading role in the proxy war in Ukraine. If you watch the German generals and military spokesmen when German tanks rolled into Kursk and they told, this is where they were humiliated during World War II. This would undermine Putin by sending German tanks into Russian territory. It's very crazy stuff. And of course, when Israel attacked and America attacked Iran the first time, Chancellor Merz said, Israel's doing the dirty work for us. And now the second time he goes to the White House and explains that, as you said, he's all in. This is a good war. Iran shouldn't be protected by international law. So this is very ugly Germany, which is emerging. It's not the peace project they sold themselves as at all. And I think overall this is a problem for Europe. We don't really know our role in the new world now, because in the bipolar system during the Cold War, there was a natural overlapping interest of the US and the Europeans to balance the Soviet Union. In the unipolar moment after the Cold War, we had a common interest that was collective hegemony. That is, a political West should dominate the world. It should stand on two legs, the US and the EU, obviously under US leadership. But in the multipolar world, the Americans, they want to pivot away from Europe. They want to go other places. They want to go to the Western Hemisphere, to East Asia. And suddenly the Europeans, without the American pacifier, they fear they will fragment, they will lose their relevance in the world. So what do? Well, a sane Europe would seek to diversify its ties, reach out to the Chinese, Russians, have many economic partners. And instead, they're doing the opposite. They're cutting themselves off from all other centers of power in the hope that we will show our loyalty and love to the Americans, and then we will be rewarded and they won't leave us. This is kind of the geopolitics of Europe now. And this is what Merz was saying to Trump as well. Like, we're all in on Iran, but you kind of have to give some way on Ukraine. We can't give away, make any meaningful concessions. In other words, the war must continue. We have to fight to the last Ukrainian.
Now, let's finally, Professor, talk about the gas. Where I am, I can receive RT television. You, of course, in the free West, are not allowed to view the television stations that you'd like to view. But Putin was just on RT, and it was in the light of the FT story that the Europeans will have to now talk to the Russians and start buying some more Russian gas. Putin said, well, I might cut European gas altogether. After all, you're going to do it in just 9 months' time. So why shouldn't I do it now? If I were Putin, I would say, okay, we will resupply you with gas, but only once you have lifted every single sanction you've imposed on Russia, given us back every penny of our money that you stole, and pay interest on that money for the time that you have had it in your illicit hands. I'm not sure whether Putin will do that, not sure what he will do, but he definitely looked as if he saw the opportunities now.
Yeah, no, but this is, you could make it up. This is such a disaster, but it also shows some of the miscalculations from the Europeans, because the whole idea is we'll put all of these sanctions on the Russians. They will feel the squeeze, and at some point they will have to fall in line in order to get our trade back. But this would have worked in the 90s when we were the only game in town. But now, of course, the Russians can simply divert their trade to the east, and that's what they began doing ever since 2014, when they realized that there would be no common European home. There would be NATO expansion, and that would predictably lead to war. So that's when they started 2014, pursue what they call the Greater Eurasia Initiative, which means integrate their economy more with the rising economies of the East instead of the hostile and stagnant economies in the West. But also, if we are Europeans, we should hope for to thrive and have security. But when our leaders talk about energy security, they talk about liberating themselves from Russian gas. But this works in the same way as liberating yourself from oxygen. It doesn't make any sense. If you want energy security, you want cheap and reliable access of energy resources. You want as many suppliers as possible, and you want to have a nice mix to avoid excessive dependence on any one state. But instead, what are we doing? We're cutting ourselves off from a most important supplier. And now we have to buy all our gas from the United States, even more so now that the Gulf states are unable to supply Europe. And what happens then? Well, the US can hike the prices to whatever they want, and our industries will then begin to deindustrialize. And then the Americans can offer subsidies for those European industries to move over to America, where gas and energy is cheaper. I mean, we're doing everything the opposite of what we should do. I mean, by all means, we should buy American gas, but also Russian, and as many suppliers as possible. It's the fact that we're in this position now where we're going to go to the Russians and say, okay, we will let you sell us gas, so our economies can continue to still huff and puff, and then we can continue the war against you. I mean, this is kind of strange. Especially when the Russians have other clients. It's really, absurd to watch. But I can't
the Japanese,
understand why there's not more
the
dissent in
Japanese
Europe.
would call it, the Japanese would call it harikari. They have committed suicide, the European leaders, and unfortunately our people have allowed them to do so and have woken up, if they have woken up, all too late. Professor Glenn Diesen, always an education to hear you talk and to read your material. Thanks very much for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.